Hi everybody. Today we're going to talk about food preservation. The necessity of food preservation is quite evident for every one of us because the incidence of food poisoning, the diseases which are being caused by foodborne diseases and all that are quite too much in today's conditions. So let's see how can we preserve food. What is food preservation? It is a process through which the physical as well as the chemical agents are used to prevent the microbial spoilage of food. Food preservation, it mainly aims to treat food in a manner to prolong its storage life. Usually if you go to look into the food, what happens is most of the spoilages which are being caused in the food is mainly being caused by microbes. Of course, there are different other methods by which the food can get spoiled, but we are talking about methods which would preserve the microbial spoilage of food, to prevent the microbial spoilage of food. And for that, one thing that we can do is you can either destroy the organisms of the food, or you can take up a strategy so that the time taken for the microbes to grow in the food can be prolonged. So when you prolong this period, what happens? The food spoilage will be prevented. You should realize one thing, the food spoilage can happen only when the microbial counts reaches a particular level. At a small numbers, even in small numbers when they are present, it might not need cause to spoilage. So the two strategies that we can adopt to prevent the microbial spoilage of food is either to kill the microbes completely or to give a condition so that the growth of the microbe in the food will be prolonged. Then of course we have, when we cook food, we should take measures that will be killing the microbes. So let's go into details of it. Two principles that we can adopt here is either kill the microbes or inhibition principle. So these are the two principles, either inhibit its growth or to kill the microbe. Now coming to the details of the inhibition principle. The inhibition of the microbes in its growth parameters can be applied by different methods. Either by reducing the water activity. You know what is water activity? The water activity is the amount of water which is being needed for the growth of the microbes in the food. So by reducing the water activity, you can inhibit its growth. And some of the techniques which will help in this is by drying or salting. The second inhibition principle is the reduction in the pH. You can change the pH of the food. Now every microbe has its own desired level of pH at which it can grow. So if you provide a pH which is inhibitory for its growth, what happens? It will not be able to multiply in the food. So you can reduce the pH either by a process of fermentation, so that naturally itself the microbes will, that is the good microbes will ferment the food and they will produce acids. And these acids could inhibit the growth of the pathogens. But in another way, you can add also certain acids into it. Okay, now in the case of some foods, we may add vinegar. Vinegar will reduce the acidic condition. The acidity or the pH of the food will be reduced when you add vinegar. So that is one way to inhibit the growth of microbes. As it's quite familiar for every one of us. Usually the pH of the food has been found to be 2. And we do expect that at pH 2, the microbes are being killed in the stomach. So if you reduce the pH of the food that we eat to some extent, okay, normally in neutral pHs the microbes will rapidly multiply. So if you reduce the pH, what happens? The microbe will be killed. The third inhibition principle is by using of preservatives. Preservatives, there are different preservatives. You have natural preservatives as well as you have chemical preservatives. Now one commonly used chemical preservative is sodium benzoate, which has been added in the foods that we eat. Now when you buy some pickles or some jams or something, when you buy from out, you can notice that they do not get spoiled very fast even if you keep it outside. But in the case of homemade pickles, what does it mean? If you continuously use a wet spoon or something, the homemade pickles will get spoiled at a very faster rate. That's because when you make things at home, you might not add a preservative into it. And so that will so the all the fungi or the mold or something which happen to be in the wet spoon which you frequently use will contaminate the pickle that you use. So by in commercially produced pickles and all that, what happens, they add various preservatives like sodium benzoate into them. Then the next inhibition principle which we can talk about is by using low temperatures. That's quite evident. Every microbe has a desired level of its temperature. It has an optimum level of its temperature beyond which it cannot survive. Below the optimum temperature or above the optimum temperature, it will inhibit the growth of the microbe. Usually we use a low temperature mainly because the microbial activity or the metabolic activity of the microbes will be reduced by lowering the temperature. So chilling and freezing is a method that we can use. So now, but there is a question, we do keep vegetables in the fridges, okay? In the vegetable boxes also the vegetables might get spoiled sometimes. That's mainly because some microbes can even withstand the temperatures of just chilling. 4 degree also certain microbes can grow. So that is the reason why even after chilling sometimes the microbes will grow. But you know, in the freezer, when you go to freeze something, the chance of microbial contamination has been found to be even more less. Then next you have another principle that we can use is smoking. Here it is having a drying and a preservative method. In olden days, when fridges were not popular, but people used to use lots of meat and all that for their food. And I do remember a situation in my house where my grandmother used to smoke the meat. Okay, we prepare the roast of the meat, and this meat is always been kept on top of the what does it means, there are earthly burners, okay, where we use daily what is it, earthen burners will be on, it's not gas type of stoves and all that. Okay, so you have to keep firewood and you burn the earthly burners, and what happens, the smoke will be coming on top. And always this meat has been preserved on small racks which are above these smokes. And so what happens, on daily basis the roasted meat gets smoked, and it adds good flavor to the meat. At the same time, what happens, all the microbes which happen to grow on meat will be prevented. So smoking is another method which was prevalent in the olden days. Even now you can do it, but daily you need to smoke it so that the microbes are prevented from growing. So the inhibition methods into detail. It mainly includes the preservation of food by inhibition methods, and it does not temporarily imply that the destruction of microbes will happen. And on removal of the inhibiting influence, the food will undergo spoilage as the microorganism present now will grow and multiply to cause the spoilage. So if you remove the inhibition method, now if you take a food from a fridge, okay, from a freezer, and you keep it out, even if a microbe was there, it will multiply. Within the fridge, it will not multiply, but when you take the food out and keep it outside at the room temperature, it will multiply. I think you should know a principle when we buy chicken, okay? We say that before 2 hours, you have to, if you're going to preserve it, before 2 hours, you have to keep it within the fridge. Because meat or chicken or whatever it is, that is a high rich source of protein, and microbes rapidly multiply within them. Okay, so if you keep the chicken just cut for 2 hours outside, what happens? All these microbes will be rapidly multiplying in them. Then of course there is a situation in which we of course marinate these foods and keep. That is a different situation, because when you marinate them with chili, ginger, turmeric and all that, these are all inhibitory agents which will inhibit the growth of microbes. So in such case, if you keep it outside for longer for marination also, that is not an issue. But raw meat, when you keep it outside without any inhibitory agent onto that, what will happen? The microbes will multiply in it. So the basic thing that we should note in the case of inhibition method is that once the inhibitory agent has been removed, the microbe will multiply. So you have to take precautions how long you have to keep the inhibition. If you want the inhibition to prolong, you need to keep the food in the same situation for so much time. So I think this is clear to you. We'll be talking on the further details in the next session.